This video is going to take a general look at what luminosity selections do. I'm calling it Understanding Luminosity Selections. If you haven't done much with them, this will kind of give you an overview in order to use them in your work. So if you will go to the editor that you're going to be working in and go to the File, Open command, and come onto your computer to where you put the material I saved for today's class. It's a folder called Luminosity Images. Open it. And we're going to use three that we haven't used in the other video. So if you will click on Cafe and Bosque, Sunset, and Moon Rising, a control or command key between those will allow you to select those three while skipping over the ones that are in the other activity. Once you've got them selected, go to the Open command, give them a minute to open, and you will have three images open in the editor of the program you're working in. I have mine set to float all the images, but for this activity it's nice to tab them. If yours aren't tabbed, you go to the Window menu and you come down to Images, you'll see an option, Consolidate All to Tabs. You can do that if you want to do this. It will help us to follow, I think, better. So what I'm going to do is describe what I'm trying to accomplish, and then discuss how do I choose which luminosity selection will get the job done. Now, if you're in full Photoshop, you can look at selections without opening separate layers. But if you have downloaded the set for elements, you might find it useful to just follow along with me. If you're used to the others, you won't have any trouble. So what I want to do is say, what is my intention here? Well, when I stood at this place and took this shot, I had a clear understanding that the bush had leaves on it. They weren't in direct light, but there was enough reflected light that my eyes could see more detail in the bush. But my problem is I have to choose a method to lighten those bushes that will not lighten the sky and will not damage the moon against the sky, and it won't make an uncomfortable change in the rest of the tree. It's really the bush that I want to do. So whenever the exposure is my intention, in other words, I'm trying to change the exposure in part of an image, I want to go in the Actions panel, and when I open it, I want to be sure I am in the section called TK Levels. Levels are what I use when I'm working on problems of exposure. And I know it's going to be the darker half of his choices. He starts with all the light choices. Then it gets down here from darks 1 to darks 5. And the difference between them is the lower the number, the more shadows that are included. And the higher the number, more it fixes in on the darker shadows. Well, I know it's got to be the darker ones, but I'm not certain which one I'm going to want to use. So I come down here and say it's certainly somewhere in the upper range. So I'm going to look at three of these adjustment layers. The one that is Shadows Darks 3, I'm going to add with the Control or Command key Super Darks 4 and Ultra Darks 5. I don't know which of those is going to work for me, but if I open all three of those, so I go to the little play button here, and I play the three selections, I will get three adjustment layers, and each will have a different mask, and the masks are named on that layer. So I know that I want to be somewhat subtle, so if I start looking at the one that's most inclusive, which is Shadow Darks 3, I want to see what that looks like. I point to it, I hold the Alt on Windows, the Option on Mac, and click the mask, and it takes the place of the image. And the lighter the area of the mask, the more adjustment that's going to occur. I talked about being subtle. This is nowhere subtle, that it will make an enormous change so that it'll be harder to adjust this and get some subtlety. So I'm not going to use Shadow Darks 3. It just includes too much of a range of shadows. So to get back to the image, put that Alt or Option key down and click on the mask again, you're back here. Let's step up to Super Darks 4, and let's hold it down, Option or Alt, click on the mask. So you can see that what was very white is now a little more of a gray tone. That means that the adjustment won't be as sudden. And you can also see, if you were to go back and forth, the sky is blacker. So we surely don't want to change the sky at all. So that's a possibility, but let's check for Ultra Darks 5. So how do you get back to the image? Alt or Option, click on the mask. Come up to Ultra Darks 5, Alt or Option, click on the mask. And now I can look at this. And so I can say, well, it depends how much adjustment I want to make. If you're confident that you don't want to make much of an adjustment, this might work fine. If you are thinking that it might need more, the advantage in using Super Darks 4 is it's a separate layer. And when you're done, if you think it's too much, you can lower the opacity on that layer and reduce the quantity. So in general, when I'm working on separate layers, I tend to perhaps be stronger in adjustment, knowing I can back off afterward. If I don't get enough of adjustment, I've got to go back and redo it. So I'm going to return the picture, Alt or Option, click on the mask, and I'm going to go to Super Darks 4. So if I want to use this, I've got to click on the layer, and now to actually use that adjustment layer, I go to the thumbnail in front and I double click. And here comes what that looks like. It tells me that it's focusing on most of the dark pixels. I might tell you that in all of these selections, what you see in that levels adjustment layer is the pixels that are at least 50% selected. That means they are at least a full neutral middle gray. And if there aren't many, there are more pixels that will have a little effect, but this is where most of the effect will take place. So in order to raise the brightness on those pixels, I always go to the opposite end where the opposite triangle is. And this very gradually will let me slide in and move the midpoint toward the pixels. As it gets closer to the pixels, I'll begin to see my image brighten. And at some point, I'm going to say, I wonder if that's enough. I go back up to the layer where I'm working, and I turn off the eyeball, and I put it back on again. And I have to decide, is that realistic enough for what I saw? I always say that the best thing you can do when you're traveling is look at your images soon, because you want to remember what caused you to take this picture. And our memories aren't all that good when it comes to remembering. I just had enough reality in that bush that it looked like a bush. And when I test it with turning on and off that layer, I get what I want. And I'm wondering, did it change the sky? So I'm going to do it again, but look at the sky. Well, it lightened the tree, didn't it? So what could I do if this is really perfect for me down below, but I think it made a little change in the upper half that I don't want? This is one of the wonderful things about using masks based on Tony Kuiper's luminosity selections. If you go back to that mask, I got to turn it on first, the layer. If I go back to its mask and I do Alt Option, click on the mask, and I want to turn off the effect in the top half of the image, we know that anything that is light is going to be changed. So if I paint with a black brush at 100% opacity and I hide the top part of the mask, nothing up there will change. So I've already known that I didn't want the changes up above. So if I go and get a brush, make sure that black is the foreground color, I come over here and I know it has to be soft, and you can see the fuzzy edges on the brush. And the opacity, I never put the full effect on unless I want to turn it black. In this case, I've said I want to turn it totally black so I can use 100% opacity. I take my brush and say, well, I might as well save myself work by making the brush larger. So I can make it quite large. And I'll start here, and I'll start holding my mouse button down, and I'm going to come over the part at the top thoroughly. And as I get down lower, I'm going to make the brush smaller, and then I can come in comfortably and get rid of things that are down here. But I don't want to damage the fact that it's the bush that needs it. Now I'm wondering what I did. So let's get the picture back. Alt or Option, click on the mask. And now if I turn that layer off and on, the only change should occur in the bush because I have blacked out the rest of the mask. Let's find it. Unclick it. Click it again. You see that? The changes occurred on the bush area and nothing has changed up above. That's what my intention was. So you get an awful lot of control. First, you choose the right selection that pinpoints what you want to do, but with the understanding that if you don't like what it does in part of the picture, you can paint on the mask and make it just exactly what you want. So that handles that particular image, and I'm going to close it without saving it because it's a practice image and you might want to play with it again at another time. The next one that I have is the cafe scene, but I would like to work on Bosque Sunset. Can you change over so that we see this one? This is a perfect example why we depend upon luminosity selections. I don't want to do anything to the color in that sunset. But there was an enormous contrast, and when I stood there, it was quite clear that there was grass there. It wasn't just a black nothing. So if I want to lighten those very dark area down there and not damage the sunset, I've got to be careful I get the right selection of the dark part of that image. So let's go back to the action panel. And again, the problem is exposure. So I'm going to stay with the group here called TK Levels. And I'm going to go to the dark end of it. And I have 5 levels of darks, from darks 1 to ultra darks 5. And the difference is, darks 1 will take all the shadows into its selection. Darks 2 begins to eliminate some of the shadows, and darks 3 focuses on the darker part, and super darks 4 focuses on the even darker parts, and ultra darks 5 really zooms in on the dark ones. And I don't know, I know it's going to have to be pretty dark, but I'm not sure exactly which one it's going to be. So I'm going to try 3, 4, and 5 again. So you choose one, hold your Command on Mac, Control on Windows, and add 4 and 5 to it. So I have 3 options. And I'm now going to the play button, and I'm going to play those 3 separate layers. And now you can see right away that the one that is Shadow Darks 5 is making the very dark part of the image quite bright, which means there will be a stronger effect on it. And so I don't rely upon seeing the masks like that. I want to put them in front of the picture. So go to Shadow Darks 3. And that one is going to take in more range of darks. If I hold the Alt or Option key, click on that mask, oh my goodness, look what's going to change. The whole sky is going to change. There's no question that's not going to work. Bring back the picture. Alt or Option, click on the mask. Let's go up to super darks. Now that's focusing a little more on the dark part. So let me play it with Alt or Option, click on the mask. Well, it seems to have gotten most of the sky out of the way, but I see some lighter clouds in the sky. It's not totally avoiding the clouds, and it's still very bright down on those tree trunks. Remember, there was no direct light. It was just reflected sunlight, sunset light. So I think that's still going to make too strong a change. So Alt or Option, click on that mask, get back to your image. Let's go to Ultra Darks 5. Same thing, Alt or Option, click on the mask. Well, look at that for you. I like the fact that some of the change is going to be done on a very dark gray section of the mask because it won't be as strong a change. And I'm confident that my sky looks pretty clear of going to have any effect. But I don't have to worry because if there's any effect in the sky, I can paint the mask totally 100% black. But for now, I think I'm going to use this. So I bring the picture back, Alt or Option, click on the mask. And now while I see my picture, I double click on the thumbnail, and here is my example. So you see, it is mostly focused on very dark pixels. And there will be a few that aren't shown in this histogram that will change, but much more lightly. And so I'm going to see what happens when I grab the white point and start to slide it toward the pixels. And as I get closer to it, I'm going to take a look at my image. And you know, it's hard to see it change. So before I go any further, I'm going to check it out. So I'm going to the layer, the ultra dark layer. I'm going to hide the eyeball and bring it back. It has made it a little more realistic, hasn't it? Has it done anything bad anywhere else in the image? Not that my eye sees. So I'm not sure, but there's no harm in trying it a little more. So I have it, I'm seeing it, that eyeball is open. So I'm going to move that a little further over. And remember, the stopping point for me is when that mid-gray point comes to the first visible pixels. It's absolutely where I stop. And I quite often don't go that far. And I think this is really too much foreground light. It distracts from the sunset. But let's just check it. We'll turn it off. Oh, it's much too much. So I'm going to back up. And as I back up, I'm going to watch. And all I want is a sense that there's something there beside black. And I think somewhere around here in my image, I might be good, so I have to check it again. Yes, it's very slight, isn't it? But it satisfies me because my image looks more like my eyes saw it. And why do our eyes see better than the camera sensor? Because we have pupils in our eyes. And if you look at the dark part of an image, your pupils will dilate and you'll see better. The camera has an aperture which is set, boom. And if you take only one picture, you have one eyeball setting, one aperture. And of course, if it were important to get varying levels, you could go in and do an HDR image and take different exposures. But all I want to do is not disturb the sunset light, but bring a little more visibility in the grass. And that very slight thing does it for me. I have two, if I was actually working on this image, it doesn't matter if I leave adjustment layers that I haven't used. They don't affect the image, and they have almost no effect on the size of the file. So if it doesn't bother you, leave them unused. If it bothers you and you want to be tidy, you can select the ones you don't use and delete them with layer delete and get rid of them. But it doesn't make a difference in the size of the file, and they don't have any effect on the image because we did not use them. So if that's the way I want, of course, I would save it. In our case, we're going to close that image and not save it because it's here for you to practice with. So I exit out and don't save. And now we're left with the cafe scene. This is a very interesting image because it was in diffuse light. So except for the building in the very back right, it's very low in contrast. And when I look at it, I would like to be able to see a little more that there are real people under those canopies. And I would like to try to cut back that building so it isn't quite as obtrusive. It's the brightest thing in the image. And if I could tone down the brightness in that, I might go back and do a little contrast. But right now, I need to tone it down because contrast tends to brighten the brights and darken the darks. And right now, it's a little too bright for my desire. So, you know, this problem is exposure. So I'm going to go back to the actions to the same levels group. And I'm going to say, all right, I would like to work first on getting the over brightness down. So I'm looking at the light part of the choices. They're at the top of that folder. And again, lights 1 will take everything that is average light or lighter. Lights 2 It's a little more selective. Bright Lights 3 is still more selective. And if I went to Ultra Lights 5, it's possible the only thing I might see is that building. But I know I don't want 1 and 2. They would be too overall. It's that sky that's kind of washed out a little. So I'm going to try on the lights group 3, 4, and 5. Bright Lights 3, and add to that Super Lights 4 and Ultra Lights 5, and play the 3 up. So now I can see what happens. If we start with Bright Lights 3, let's see what will change. Alter Option, click on the mask. Okay, it's going to catch the sky in the back and the building, catch just a little bit on that, the shadow that's on the canopy over the people's table, which may or may not be a problem, but you probably already know if it bothers me, I'll come back to the mask and paint it over that and get rid of that change. But that looks pretty good, but let me go ahead and look at Super Lights 4. Bring the picture back, go to Super Lights 4. Oh, that tends to focus attention on that overly bright building and less on the sky. Well, I'm going to bring this back and I'm going to do Ultra Lights 5, and it doesn't do much for me at all. It would catch the building a little, but very little. So I'm going to skip Ultra Lights 5, and I'm going to catch the brightest areas. I'm going to bring them down with Bright Lights 3, and then I may go and do a little more work on Super Lights 4. So if you will come down and give me back my image, so it's Alter Option. And now I'm going to work on Bright Lights 3. So I click on that layer, and then I double click on the thumbnail. And you can see this time the pixels that are selected are on the bright side of the histogram. And again, those are the ones that are at least 50% selected, meaning they will have the greatest effect. So I do the opposite of the darks. I grab the black point and I start dragging it toward here. And as it gets closer, I take a look at what's happening in the sky. And at some point in there, I'm going to stop and check it out. Go to the layer you're working on, turn off the eyeball, and put it back on again. That's really improved that sky. And if I'm wondering if I want more, all I do is go back to that black dot and drag it a little further in and check it out again. Well, that appeals to me because that sky is much more interesting. And I know that if I would like to further darken the building, then I'm going to go up to Super Lights 4, and I'm going to play the thumbnail in the front, and this is what it selects. And I'm going to go and see what happens if I move the black point over to darken a little bit. And you know, I can't tell what's happened, but I might be able to tell if I hide that layer. Well, it's further darkened the sky. It has darkened the building. And so I have to decide whether I like the sky and it's further darkened. I kind of like it. Actually, I see some pink clouds from the sunset back there that were not visible before. So I think I'm willing to accept both layers work. I'm just not going to use Ultra Darks 5. So having that done, I've taken care of the overly bright sky. And now I'd like to bring up the people under those just so that, you know, they don't have any light on them. But I know when I looked at them, my eyes dilated enough that I saw there were people. So I'm going back to the actions. And this time, I'm going to look at the darker part of the levels group. And they're not, it's always a case of, you know, where is it going to work? And as you get skilled with this, you have a better idea what you want. But when you're starting, the easiest thing to do is to choose several choices and find which one looks the best. So let's go Shadow Darks 3, 4, and 5 again. And again, select the 3 and play those 3 actions. And now, remember, I'm interested in doing something with the people under them more than anything else. So you can tell right now, Shadow Darks 3 is going to affect the building a lot, isn't it? Let me just play that mask. Yeah, I don't want to change everything, so I'm not going to use that. Let's try Super Darks 4. Well, that really focuses on the people and very little of the building. I have to laugh. I put my copyright on it and it picks that up. And then go to Ultra Darks 5. All right, it could be 4 or 5, but 5 seems to work mostly on the people, and that's what I want to lighten. So I want to work on Ultra Darks 5, and I'm going to be sure the layer is active and that its eyeball is on, and then I'm going to double click, and it's going to give me my levels adjustment layer. And if I start dragging, see, if I get those pixels closer to the midpoint, they will be lighter than where they are. So I take the white point and I drag it over. And if you don't see the change right away, you can see it's too much when it gets in there. So I want to be sure I stop where it looks natural. And then I can turn it off, turn it on. It's very slight. So what you have to decide here is, would I have been better using Super Darks 4? I'll get a quicker adjustment, and perhaps it would adjust sooner when that midpoint isn't cut into the pixels. So what do? I simply go up and turn off that layer. I don't even have to undo it, just turn it off. Come down to Super Darks 4, and I'm going to be sure I have my adjustment layer. And it is the Super Darks 4 adjustment layer, which should make a bigger change under the tint. So let's pull the white down and see some changes occur. And as you get there, oh, there's human beings under there. Do the test. Here's the layer I'm on. Hide it and bring it back. Can you see that you can't always know in advance which of these selections will do the job for you? In this case, I thought I could do it with Ultra Darks 5, but there wasn't enough change. Why would that be? Because the light area of that mask isn't white. It's a middle gray, which means that everything I do is going to be minimized by the mask. When I got down to Super Darks 4, the selected area is brighter. Not as bright as 3, but it's brighter and it shows the change better. So it's very easy to test them out. And until you're comfortable knowing what you want to use, I recommend you take a look at several, and you might even have to try them out to see if you get the results. I don't like to have to pull that adjustment into the actual pixels that are visible. I know that it tends to make it look watery and it takes away contrast. It does a lot of things. So it's better to use the Super Darks 4 and not have to make as big an adjustment. So with that, I have gotten myself to the point where I think the image is balanced, but it might be better with a little contrast added to it. So now I have a new thought. I have 2 possibilities. If I don't want to limit where the brightness or contrast goes, I can use a normal adjustment layer. But because I would like to not change the sky, I'd like to work on that building if possible. And that building, if I recall, in fact, I can even look back here a bit, I believe, and see, the building is going to have to come back. All of the 3, 4, and 5s didn't pick it up. So the building is closer to being a normal one, either lights 1 or darks 1. It's somewhere near the average range. And if I'm not sure, then what I'm going to do is go to the action panel and close the TK levels, because I'm going to use the brightness and contrast group. So I'm going to open it, that little caret, and I know that I'm sort of in the mid-range. I could try mid-range. If you've seen the other video, you know that midtones are possible to work on. And otherwise, I could choose the darks 1 and see if that is about the building. I know I'm kind of interested in trying darks 1. And again, you don't have to try 3 at once. If I try darks 1, it's not right, I'll try a different one. So grab darks 1 and play this brightness and contrast adjustment layer. And then take a look at the sky above. Can I play Alter Option, click on the mask? Well, it's too strong, isn't it? It's picking up the sky, which probably means I need to make my selection toward the more darks. I need to move from one up to the others. So if I absolutely don't want this layer right now, I'll show you how you get rid of it. If it's selected and you go to the layer menu, delete layer. Very useful when working with luminosity masks. I just delete that one. Oops, I made the mistake of turning it off. Okay, I should have not had that thing. So now I'm back where I can say what I would like to do in brightness and contrast is I'd like to go down to pick on the darker colors. So let's try dark darks 2. Remember, I'm in the TK brightness group, brightness contrast group. Play it. And that looks much better to me, doesn't it? Play that mask, Alter Option, click on the mask. Yeah, see, that focuses the attention on the building and the people, and it means the sky is not its main activity. It's not going to hit that. So I'm ready to go ahead and get the picture back. Alter Option, click on the mask, and I'm going to double click here in the front, which is the Dark Darks 2 layer. And now there are 2 things here. You have 2 sliders, brightness and contrast. My greatest interest here is contrast. I don't know whether it needs to be brighter or not, so I'm going to experiment. What happens if I raise the brightness slider a little bit? A little more intensity. What happens when I move the contrast slider? Oh, doesn't that do something? Can you see the railings on the building there suddenly stand out? And how do I know whether I like what I did? I have to test it out. I'm going to close, hide, Dark Darks 2. Oh, isn't that amazing? It made a slight change in the sky. I don't know that it bothers me. Kind of like it gave a little life to the sky, and actually it accentuated the pink strips of clouds that are up there. If I didn't like what it did to the sky, you know what I can do. I can bring back the mask and paint black over the sky, but I kind of like what it did. So how do I know what I've done since I started? If you don't want these images taking your space, at the right side, if I double click, they'll fall down and I see all the things I've played with. So I'm going to go back to the beginning. How do you see the whole job? You hold the Alter Option key and you click the eyeball of the background layer. It'll turn off all layers above it. Here's how I started. Give another click. Here's how I ended. Can you see the subtlety of that? What I like about using luminosity selections is that I feel the results are very natural. And I never have to fool around with something changing that I didn't want to change. So once again, Alter Option, click on the background eyeball. If at any point, any of these sliders you think aren't right, they're still there. You can go back and change them. If you think they aren't what you want, they're still there. And of course, if it bothers you to have ones you didn't use, then as you make a choice, you can delete the layers you're not going to use. It leaves it less cluttered, but they aren't changing anything in the image. So basically, we have taken that image very subtly, and it was a very diffuse light source. The only real light on that building comes reflected off the right building, I believe. That's how it gets its light bouncing. And we just gave it a little extra accentuation. So it's very useful to play around with the options to find what works. And if you do it for a while, you'll be much better at deciding which selection will focus the attention where you want to do it. So you take it and close it and don't save it, so it's there to practice with later.